Bless you, because I am technically challenged. So just out of curiosity, I'm Debbie Terwilleger, Snohomish County Surface Water Management Director, and I'm definitely more on the policy side of things. By training, I'm a landscape architect. I've been really interested in natural system management for a lot of years. In terms of the audience today, how many of you would say that you're more on the science end of it as opposed to policy? So give me a hand if you're more on the science end. Okay, a lot. And then on the policy end? Okay, we have a good mix. So in ending up this presentation, what I'm supposed to be covering are basically how sort of decisions get made. And so I have to say I really appreciate information from the entire spectrum of who we've heard from, because as a local government representative, I definitely try to take what the science is telling us to be able to incorporate it into real life. And so the presentation that I'm going to talk to you today about is hopefully address some of those how-tos in terms of how we've been either successful or we're trying to be successful in integrating science into decision-making. So I'm going to do three things in my presentation. The first is just highlight some of the floodplain management issues. And Julie did a fantastic job of giving some context here, so I'm going to probably be able to whip through a couple of my slides because of her excellent, excellent work. Thank you. Then we're going to talk about, what have we done? What has Snohomish County done to create pathways for consensus? Because, at the end of the day, we're talking about two things. We're talking about really good information that's solid, conveying that to stakeholders so that they can make good decisions. And so how do you do that? I mean, it sounds good, but how do you actually do that? And what I'm going to talk a little bit about is what we consider a long-term investment in the people piece with something called the Sustainable Land Strategy. And the Sustainable Land Strategy is basically a forum that's been created with lots of different stakeholders to discuss a wide-ranging issues. And it was originally started to really address the conflict between agriculture and fish restoration. So farms and fish were kind of at odds. But I can tell you that over the last 4 years that it's been in existence, we've broadened out to a number of different issues that we've been able to handle. And so through the process that I'll tell you a little bit about, I think it gives us a good opportunity then to integrate some of this new information that we're getting, something like I can't wait, I'm on pins and needles for the decision support tool to be released to me. So it's a really good starting point for that. But a lot of the comments I'm going to be making are kind of in the context of fish and farms, but know that flood risk management and climate change and sea level rise are also part of the conversation. And then I'll just talk a little bit about lessons that we're learning. Do I have a pointer? Maybe I do have a pointer. Anyway, so we've already, I guess this doesn't quite work. So you've seen actually a better map of this, but the Snohomish River comes down. He did find me one. Like I said, I'm technically challenged. There we go. There we go. Okay, there we go. I found it. Yay. So this is the area, this is the confluence that's been discussed. And so I'm going to talk primarily about this area, which we call the Lower Snohomish Reach. But the reason why I've got these polygons, if you will, outlined in red are that these are a set of quantitative analyses that we've done to try to develop surrogates for river process. And it's part of what we've been doing to try to provide information then that can input into decision making. And these assessments were the basis for, we were able to port that into the decision support tool that TNC worked on. But anyway, geography-wise, we're still talking about the same area that previous speakers have. So some of the key issues in the Lower Snohomish River. One thing I wanted to touch on was a little bit about flood management. So what is a little unusual for us in Snohomish County is that I don't have my map up anymore, but in that Lower Snohomish Reach, there was actually quite an effort in the early 1990s to come up with a consolidated elevation for the levees, which are actually designed to overtop. This is not the case in other places, even in the Snohomish or in the Stillaguamish. But what we have is a situation where there are existing dikes because there's high-value agriculture that is behind the dikes, and they're primarily managed by special districts. And so if you're a special district in one of the flood French Slough Flood Control District, and you were wanting to not get flooded, and you might raise your dikes to a certain elevation, then downstream of you then would say, wait a minute, we're getting all the water, let's raise ours higher. And so there were these kind of dike wars going on. So finally, reason prevailed, and there was a negotiated agreement about what that level should be. And also, they were designed to be overtopping. So there is an expectation that there will be flooding, and that's one of the ways that it's been approached in that particular area. But one of the things that we're seeing that's an issue in the Snohomish Basin as well as in the Stille Basin is just that Snohomish is a critical basin for salmon recovery, as Julie was mentioning. And specifically for Chinook, they're main stem spawners, so you not only need intertidal areas in the estuary, but you also need a lot of complexity in the main stem. And so how do you go about creating that habitat or restoring that when essentially most of those floodplain areas are in private ownership and represent the bulk of the ag inventory for Snohomish County? That's really kind of the crux of what started something called the SLS, the Sustainable Land Strategy. So besides being a critical basin for salmon recovery, like I said, there's high-value agriculture in the floodplain. But agriculture itself has its own problems. And so I'm really excited that Julie's slide also had the S word, subsidence, because when you have a floodplain and you dike the floodplain, the peat organic soils behind the dikes no longer get inundated, and so through the farming activity and through not being inundated, they start to compress. And so we've seen significant amounts of subsidence. So the land behind the dikes is actually lowering in elevation, which really impacts the drainage systems that fall into it. So it's difficult because we've got a land base for agriculture that in and of itself is getting less and less productive just because of the subsidence issue. That also causes water quality problems, because if you're a farmer and you have a ditch system that drains your fields, that goes out a tide gate into the river, and that's slowly subsiding, a lot of times you may not have enough slope to adequately drain your fields anymore, which causes water quality problems, which then, if you did have fish passage through there, the fish, form a blockage to fish. And so if you're a farmer in that context, you're in trouble on a whole lot of realms. You can't maintain your agricultural business, and you're also in trouble with the tribes. You're also in trouble with folks that have salmon recovery issues. And so it's a multiple-headed problem with land subsidence. We also have an issue with just aging infrastructure. We know that these dikes have been created since the 1930s, and some of the special districts do a great job of sort of keeping them maintained. Others are simply not funded to do that. I mean, they assess themselves. So if there are 10 farmers that assess themselves to maintain a dike, it's a big financial burden for them. And so some districts have been more well-heeled and more successful in doing that than others. So aging infrastructure is also very costly. Aging demographics is another issue. So we've got farmers in both the Snohomish and Stille Valley that are just simply getting older, and you're not necessarily seeing a younger generation coming forward. So there's a lot of change and dynamics with the ag industry that makes it very difficult to, they want to hold on to what they have. And so finally, I just wanted to mention, and I think Governor Inslee said this, just this notion of understanding and acceptance that things are changing, specifically whether it's because of climate change or whatever, just really getting that so that you can see it and understand it and act on it and have a sense of urgency has been one of the struggles that we've been trying to address, which again, good information is one way to do that. So we start with a common information base. Decision support tool is a key piece of it, as well as our quantitative assessments, which provide information to the floodplain owners about what's happening with the river. And it gives us a way to look for creative solutions to problems. And I'll show you some examples of the information base that we're currently using. And then the second pathway, like I said, is to make a long-term investment in people. We recognized about 4 or 5 years ago when a number of large estuarine restoration projects were starting to come into fruition in Snohomish County. And again, if you breach dikes in the estuary to create intertidal habitat, you're also taking ag land out of production. And so there's a large, kind of a big dust up about 4 to 5 years ago, when the ag interests realized that there was a lot of ag land that would essentially be lost for restoration. And so what we needed to do at that point was set up something that was a long-term conversation that could occur so that we could talk through and develop solutions for this issue. So you really do, part of making climate change or any other addressing these issues, that you have to make a long-term investment in talking to stakeholders. It's also helpful to reframe the issues with common understanding. Julie's example of using pictures, before and after pictures, is a great way of reframing it, because if you go into many of the arenas that I frequent, climate change is a dirty word, right? It's like Santa Claus. A lot of people just don't believe, and you're not going to get there. And so it's helpful to reframe that notion into something that they understand, such as, gee, my dikes do seem to be overtopping more frequently, right? I'm having to maintain and apply for permits to repair my dikes because I'm seeing a lot more erosion. Those kinds of, if you can relate the problems they're trying to solve with that, that's a way of reframing in a way that you can talk to about it, as opposed to responding to things that they may not necessarily believe in. So it's kind of the equivalent of, they may not believe in Santa Claus, but they're willing to put some cookies out, just in case. There we go. So, and then the last thing that I'm just going to touch on here has to do with, if you can get people together, if you can have them talking in common terms, they really want to do something, right? It's one thing to talk all you want to, but it's really helpful to do something. And so the funding that's been provided for these integrated multi-benefit floodplain projects has really been helpful, because it gives dollars to actually implement some of these solutions. So I'm going to skip over a couple of these things, but I wanted to, like I said, in Snohomish County, we've been using river assessments to try to develop surrogates for river process, because the process is what's causing the impacts, whether it's creating habitat or causing erosion. So we're trying to deal with describing to people what the process is. And so our assessments generally try to identify the risk or the suitability of different activities. And so, like I said, I'm probably not going to go into as much detail about the assessments as I would normally, but suffice to say, it's a tool that we've been using that we can take to floodplain stakeholders, and they can actually see what the impacts would be if they rocked an area or if we reconnected a side channel. It's a very helpful dynamic, and it gives them a picture of what the possibilities could be. So this is an example of an area in the lower Snohomish where we have this information. And so this is a map of actually the ag lands in yellow, and we overlay that with some of the sediment and process areas to be able to see with the farmers where could we do restoration projects that it wouldn't necessarily negatively impact them. We use, this is a sediment, a bed load analysis that provides an indication of how sediment's moving through the system. And once again, if you're a farmer and you know that a certain area is always aggrading, and you're able to see this through a scientifically process, it gives better credibility, and it also gives everybody kind of a common basis of understanding. So even though we're using a lot of technical data, it's really impressive how sophisticated the landowners soon get to be, because they're interested, they know the land in some ways better than we do, and they can, in their minds, correlate those things. So again, using good information that allows you to have sort of a common basis gives you the platform to be able to have these conversations. And so in terms of sustainable land strategy, the goal of this collaboration is to have a net gain for fish, farms, and also to make sure that tribal treaty rights are respected, because the tribes are no small entity when it comes to dealing with floodplain management, whether it's because they have treaty rights, but they also have an interest in making sure that floodplains are functional. So it's all three areas need to be addressed. Net gain for agriculture includes things like improving ag productivity, farmland protection, streamlined permitting and funding, and infrastructure support. And so when we have these conversations, we're seeking those things on behalf of the ag community. But also for the conservation element, net gain means we need to making progress on salmon recovery, water quality. We need to have broad-based community support, and we need to be able to recognize the changing watershed dynamics. So Overall, what we've done in Snohomish County is we've convened the Sustainable Land Strategy. We focus on certain geographies where we take our common information and we sit down with stakeholders and we talk about what that information means. And so some of the lessons that we've learned include this. That it's one thing to look, we like to look on things at a reach scale, so bigger than just a project scale. Because if we talked about a particular project to do a setback, but didn't talk about how that might impact areas upstream and downstream, you lose the audience pretty quickly. So being able to analyze and talk about things on a larger scale is really important for context. It's helpful to have the quantitative information and quantitative and also qualitative information that can be displayed to the stakeholders so that they can start to have those conversations. Because if they don't understand it, they're just going to default to their own interest. Something that we've learned is that when we come into a forum, people will typically, they know what they don't want. They know what they're concerned about. But if you think about it in the way that behind every concern is a value, that is a pathway to getting to understanding. Because, for example, with the ag community and the tribes related to salmon recovery, the ag community is tied to the land. The land is a part of the ag culture. And of course, in terms of tribal cultures, the land is also a key part of that. So that's a shared value that allowed and is allowing the tribal community and the ag community to work together to get to salmon recovery projects or projects that would improve infrastructure or projects that might reduce flooding. Being able to get on the same page and be able to support projects collectively is important by having common values. And most of all, you need to make, like I said, a long-term investment in talking to people and knowing that they have a safe place to come where they can ask their questions. And you can get into arguments, but it's done in a respectful way. And that's ultimately how we make policy changes that will get us, I think, to a better scenario. So with that, I'll take any questions.